kids. This is your Papa Duke, and it's time for another story. Episode 4. The girl rode atop the mule as they emerged from the canopy of trees at the west gate. Dot is what they called her, but Rita referred to her as the welcoming party because she was always in those trees, hopping around the canopy and startling those who came and went below with a great belly laugh and a smile. Dot was not quite 10 and darted around with the energy of a firefly, appearing and disappearing, a speck in the trees, hence the name. Her older brother, Silwy, who was called Sil, insisted on calling her Opida, her birth name, which she cared little for. Their mother and father, Etain, and the carpenter Bodha, lived in the house nearest the stream. Dot had adorned the mule, whom she called Turnip, with some of the flowers from her hair. Pock preferred to call his mule Mule, so as not to spoil it and give it more cause to be uncooperative. Rita had already walked ahead into the village, where everyone was preparing for the Feast of Lughnasa, and all stopped what they were doing to meet the town's favorite son and his adopted stray. "There he is," said Phelan the chieftain, arms outstretched. "We had hoped you would be back for the feast. Give him some space, will ya?" he added as most of the unwed girls flocked around Rita. "Did you bring my oil?" came a shrill cry from the door of a long house. A stout woman with a purple scarf, which did little to dampen the sweat of her labors, wrapped around her curly red locks, wiped her hands on an overworked apron, and walked up to the gathering crowd, swaying to and fro with effort. "Hate the Romans, but their cooking oils are wonderful," she muttered to the grass while she watched her steps carefully. "Hello, Ma," said Rita cheerfully, now with his arms around her. His mother, Nola, was considered the head cook of the clan, although every family did their daily preparations of pot herbs at home, and baking was done together at the ovens. Rita smirked, and with a gesture toward Pock's cart, reported, "Indeed, I have 2 urns of your precious oil, but had to bargain in beastly ways to arrive at a fair price." Nola waved him off, shuffling toward the cart, knowing he exaggerated in jest. Rita then added rather coyly, "And I have brought something else for your frying pans." "Aye? What would that be?" asked Nola. Rita reached under the tarp that Pock was loosening and pulled out a worn and wrinkled stuffed leather pouch about the size of a large duck. "Sea eels," he proclaimed, looking around the crowd as if he had just killed a wild boar with his bare hands. "Eels? As many days as you've been out? Rotten they'll be, no?" Nola replied. "Only 2, said Rita, barely containing his excitement as the surprise was yet to be revealed. "Packed in salt, lots of salt," he added as he opened the sack to her, laughing. "Salt? Oh, may the gods smile at you today, my boy," Nola said as she clasped her hands together. "Well, I'll fry them up for you, but I will not be tasting 'em," she said with a grin and a kiss on his cheek. Pock distributed the goods ordered by his fellow townsfolk, to each his own: pottery, metal spoons, the kegs of mead to several households, the emerald silk for the chieftain to divide as he saw fit, and then he took the mule and cart with his own stash of shiny trinkets, cloaked under the Moorish carpet, to his small barn on the very edge of the village. The gold was still a secret known only to Reda and Pock. The 10 families of Moor each pulled tables and benches out of their homes and had them set up in the grassy center of the village. A collection of blankets and throws hung with precision over the drying lines as an impromptu stage for the dramas, and a group of the smallest tykes were pushing and heaving against the huge throwing stones set up for the competitions, to no avail. "Who's been in my bilberries?" came a roar from the longhouse. Nola stood at the door, eyebrow raised, staring at the 3 teenagers, Y, Sil, and Fro, whose eyes were as big as clams and mouths just as shut. "I'll get to the bottom of this deed," interjected a booming voice from behind them. It was Durg, son of Dagda and the chieftain, who was just a teen himself, but stood taller than any in Moor. The 3 conspirators spun around and looked up, jaws slacked. Durg looked over their heads at Nola and gave her a wink as she smiled and turned back to her stews. "Hands out! Let me see you," commanded the tall young man. 6 purple sets of fingers went out in a row, one by one in synchronicity and shared blame. "Bruises from playing smash your fingers, is it? Ah, be off with you," Durg said with a laugh, and they dashed away, bilberry stains on their hands and all. Nola had organized another magnificent feed, yet she fretted that it was a complete disaster. The tables were arranged end to end halfway between the stew pots in the longhouse and the great fire pit with its fatted calf on a spit. Chieftain Phelan and the other men of the clan gathered around the fire, as men often do, while the women busied themselves with the arrangements of breads and bowls, platters and ladles. Everyone brought all of their implements and utensils to the table for the community feast. Bilberries in 3 passing bowls began the meal. It was customary. Also customary was the braising of the prized bull, but old Tom the bull was spared again to the great relief of young Dot. Old Tom had sired 3 calves this season, one of which was on the spit. Such were the 2 traditions of the Lughnasa feast, and the rest was at Nola's discretion, and went as follows. Boiled rabbit with broad beans, carrots, and radish, fowls on the spit with rosemary, goat cheese, and hazelnut bread, fried mustard greens with mushrooms and turnips, wart stew with peas, parsnip, and plenty of pig parts, served in a wheat bread bowl, onions roasted in the fire pit, and, of course, the honeyed cakes. Rita got his fried sea eel, which wasn't an eel at all in the sense of the freshwater eels they regularly had from the streams and brooks nearby. It was, in fact, some exotic ocean serpent none had seen before, and he shared it with some of the other young men, at least those with ample courage. The younger children ran around swatting at persistent goats and dogs with one hand and protecting their portion of rib in the other. The calves' cheeks were the privilege of Phelan the chieftain, out of respect. Pock was partial to the tongue, so everyone obliged. It was only fair that they all shared Pock's cherries. Or it was only fair as they all shared Pock's cherries, his first crop from the tree he brought as a sampling from his family home in Verulanium. At the table, teenage boys sat in a group with the young girls, whispering and giggling from the other side, conjuring images of pairings which were certainly contrary to the wishes of their parents. Toward the center of the table, older women gossiped and decided the fates of their daughters in a matchmaking frenzy, soliciting dramatic rolling eyes and odious looks from their daughters. Etain leaned over to Nola and said, "The rabbit is wonderful, dear heart. So, who will your Rita be wed to, Nola, undeterred from picking bits of meat from bone on her plate, replied in a well-rehearsed way, "That will be a matter for his father and I to discuss. Fen will be along soon enough." Etain gave a knowing look around the table, knowing it was doubtful, that is. The town had not seen Finn since Rita was 5, some 11 years past, although Rita often talked of his grandfather, who was no doubt King of Dalreda, and also all of Ireland by then, Rita imagined. Suddenly, Dot jumped up and with a wide grin at Rita proclaimed, "It's time for the dramatics." The teenage girls reluctantly followed her fleet feet to the makeshift stage they had set up. Those seated on the performance side of the table swiveled themselves around to see the play. Pretty songs were sung, dances danced, and a recital about the fate of the harvest was given by Keelan, oldest of the available girls. The boys showed some interest until Keelan's act was done. Then they were off to throw stones and logs great distances. The final act presented the willowy girls in a group, arms raised as stalks of bread wheat, waving in a performed breeze. Another player, newly introduced and wearing the mask of Crom the Blight, whom everybody plainly saw was their Phelan, who had dashed away during a distraction, was roaring his intention to keep the harvest from the people. The people were chuckling and elbowing one another in amusement, when a ferocious commotion from the other side of the stage stopped them cold. "I am Lou, and I have come to stop you, Blight," came a bellow from behind the mask of 3 faces, followed by a howl of laughter by the audience. Here was young Dot, barely 4 feet tall, wearing the mask and carrying the stick, legs splayed and arms waving and jumping around the stage as if possessed by a demon. Her parents shook their heads in amazement of the whirlwind they had created, and Rita could not control the tears of laughter flowing from his eyes. Dot was again the star of all hearts and eyes. The sound of hoofs came fast, then a small gasp, then silence from the crowd. 3, maybe 4 horsemen emerged at a run from the canopy of the west gate. Romans with swords and full armor. Rita stood and took a deep breath. Oh my goodness, what's going to happen now? Until then, night-night.
Your narrator and author of the story was Jude Pierce Reed. Illustrations, both visual and audio, by Douglas Black. James Rayner was the story consultant. Musical flourishments provided by Frank and Black. Papa Duke's Bedtime Stories is a podcast production of From Dark Water Studio, Chicago. And I am full-staff Papa Duke's virtual assistant. Join Papa Duke again tomorrow for another episode from the Red and the Gold series of stories of legend and history.